Okay, thank you. My name's Greg Condon. I represent WeedSmart as an Extension Officer here in Eastern Australia, and FarmLink have kindly invited me here today to just talk a little bit about some of the pre-em options that growers might have generally, but more specifically in a single disc system. So single disc seeding systems are becoming more popular in this region for a whole lot of reasons, which we can talk a little bit about, but mainly we just want to cover off on some of the options that growers have with single disc and pre-ems, and then secondly, what are some of the risks that they could encounter, which is quite different to a tine system, which is where a lot of these herbicides are designed for. And then thirdly, probably a bigger picture discussion around how a single disc system and total weed control in a WeedSmart perspective influences your ultimate weed control. So that's sort of the objectives of what we're looking at. FarmLink, to their credit, have set up a great paddock scale trial here, so there's a whole range of new and old chemistry, and James Holding and Hayden Thompson and Colin Fish, the farm team, have got it set up at farm scale level. So you've got a 36 metre boom, 12 metre air seeder in a commercial cropping paddock, and they're sort of looking at the limitations of some of the new chemistry and some of the benefits of using them in a single disc system. So I guess the first and foremost thing that we really want to talk about is being on label. So legally, as a grower and as an agronomist and even the companies that manufacture the herbicides, the key thing is that we all work together and stick to the legal requirements as set by the boundaries of the label. And single disc systems largely do not, I guess, create enough separation in that seeding process to meet the requirements of a lot of labels. So trifluralin #1, which is a really well recognised herbicide in our farming systems, in no-till farming systems, doesn't suit in a single disc system. And that's largely to do with soil throw. So if you bring in some of the new exciting chemistry that's now coming out with things like Luxamax, Overwatch, and even Ultro from Adama. So these products still require that similar level of soil throw as to what we need from trifluralin. So I guess growers need to be wary of that and look at the trial data that FarmLink are creating from this demonstration here, plus what also the manufacturers are putting out there, is to sort of know the limitations of what their single disc system, or I guess there are a range of disc seeding configurations, but what are the limitations of their seeding system, and then what herbicides they can use in their own soil types. So that's the treatment it's got here. It's gone on at 120 litres per hectare as per the label restrictions. I won't go through the individual rates, but they're the treatments that are here. And I guess the key thing is that some of those products are off-label. So if you look at Callisto, for example, fantastic product, but use it only in a tine system. And the similar thing with Overwatch. It's another fantastic product. It's bringing different modes of action to complement complement the old chemistry and help control resistant populations, but also it's preferred in a tine system. I guess they're still doing work around Overwatch's, I guess, directions of use, you would say, with wheat. There's been a few challenges around barley. But yeah, that work is ongoing. So I just advise people, if you've got any doubt, just stick the label and get full understanding with your advisor and the company about what's the best practice. So that's a really key message out of all this work. So sometimes we find things in these trials that really sort of show us what we shouldn't do, but there's also other treatments showing us what we can do. And things like Arcade or prosulfocarb, which is a known chemical, we've used pre-em for a long time in disc systems. It's really safe in wheat and barley. I guess wheat in this particular case is probably safer generally with a lot of the products they've used. So again, just have a good understanding of the products that you're wanting to use and the particular conditions that it's going to happen. So 2021, you couldn't have picked a better year to do a pre-em trial. Very wet, so it tends to accentuate the impact of some of these pre-ems in a system where the soil disturbance is very minimal. So the single disc largely moves very little soil or no soil at all, and any pre-em applied herbicide is basically not thrown out of that treated row or that seed row, so the emerging crop has to deal with that chemistry or that pre-em as it emerges. So I guess a big part of this trial, and actually shows up in some of the treatments here, is the influence of seed depth. So with a single disc particularly, historically we've only had the ability to do, I guess, a spring downforce. So seeding depth at times was set by the bar weight, I guess the frame strength, and then the downforce itself. And largely beyond herbicides, we found that that's just not adequate enough for our soil types. So our clay soil types, our red loam soil types, we really want, if we're going to invest in some of these single disc systems, we want accurate seed placement on every soil type in every season. So, well, we see the evolution of hydraulic downforce now. So what it's available, it's giving growers the ability to put seed at a target depth. So if we think of canola, for example, we're getting a lot more confidence to put canola at say 25 mils if we've got a single disc, which is leaving largely a flat seed bed, but it's putting it at the same depth. So there's I guess, enhanced crop safety with things like atrazine or propyzamide. So in a cereal system, we're sort of actually pushing a little bit deeper with the single disc, where we've got hydraulic downforce and getting it to say 40 mils. So you know that there's consistent seed placement across all the variable soil types, or depending on the level of straw or residue that came out of the head of the previous year. So 2021, like I said, a pretty challenging year for pre-Ems in disc systems, but also there was a lot of residue carried over from 2020. So this particular paddock at FarmLink, it was canola last year, so there's quite a bit of residue came out on some of the chaff rows. It has had an influence on the seed depth of the machine, and then that subsequently had, I guess, a negative effect on the emerging crop due to that, I guess, variable seed depth, but also some of the herbicide effects. A key part of the FarmLink trial that they've really addressed quite importantly here is the row spacing. So to put it in perspective, if you're going to go to a disc system, you really got to start to put more emphasis on other aspects of weed control rather than the pre-em. So in a tine system, no till, you've got a lot of chemistry available to you to sort of apply at sowing in a range of crop types. So with a disc system, with that less herbicide sort of movement out of the furrow like we talked about, you've got a limited number of herbicides. So this trial has been sown by a commercial machine, a John Deere single disc, and it's on a 7.5 inch row spacing, so 190 mils. And what that sort of does, two roles, it's obviously aiming to increase yield potential. So there's a lot of data that proves that narrow row spacings increase yield. But also, it's really clear in years of research from a whole range of groups, from our own New South Wales DPI, Charles Sturt, through to WA and even into the northern zone, that the presence of a crop type, so we're not just necessarily saying it's a thick crop, but the spatial distribution, so the 7.5 inch rows in this particular sense, is actually providing you more crop competition. So the weeds struggle to not only, I guess, emerge and germinate, but also the key thing is they're struggling to set seed at the end of the season. So the crop has the upper hand. So if you look down on these narrow row spacing crops compared to something that might be at 12 inch, there's just a lot less room for the weeds to have an opportunity to sort of set seed. So the row spacing is a really key one in these single disc systems. So I guess if you're thinking of a shift from a tine to a disc, we'd really strongly advise not to stay at a wide row spacing like a 10 or 12 inch row spacing with less herbicides. So make the shift and get to a narrow row spacing. And there's a lot of growers been doing it for a long time in this part of the world, and it's sort of been I guess, an evolution that we're really happy with, and it's sort of it's a good fit for what we're trying to achieve in the medium rainfall zone of southern New South Wales. Secondly, is sort of the systems behind growers who are in a single disc system are really important. So if we think about WeedSmart, and WeedSmart's sort of mantra is the big six, so looking at a whole range of different practical tools that you can use to manage weeds. One of them is mix and rotate, which is what this trial is focusing on, the herbicide options. But beyond that, it's all the other tools that you can sort of bring into the mix as well. So here, crop competition is another one. So that helps reduce seed set. The big lever is rotations. So the ability to have a mixed rotation where something like a pulse comes into it. We're not just relying on wheat and canola. If you can bring in a pulse and potentially a range of break crops that help run that ryegrass seed bank down, then the pressure to use, I guess, herbicides in the cereal phase, for example, that might be off-label or put your crop at risk, is lessened because you've sort of got a lower seed bank to start with. So things like vetch fallows or faba beans or even hay as a tool. So we're really aiming to get that seed bank down so that we can run a successful single disc system because we don't have that chemistry. The other one that's I guess growing in popularity to a degree is harvest weed seed control. So in the past it's been things like narrow windrow burning. People have sort of moved away from that. We've now got shaft decks where the weed seeds are dropped onto the tram lines. And then the ultimate now is the harvest weed seed mill. So an impact mill on the back of the header, collecting the weed seeds as they pass through the sieves and destroying them into a chaff. So that's probably the ultimate integrated weed management, but there's probably still other steps that growers can do if they are interested in this style of farming that help address that weed seed bank and still remain profitable. So that's the key thing. You can have, you've got to be profitable but maintain a low seed bank. So there's no point just being totally focused on the weeds and growing a range of crop types that don't have a focus around profit. The other aspect to it is I guess the diversity of crops then allows you to do a diversity of practices like crop topping. So if you're in a set wheat canola rotation, you get quite limited options. If you sort of bring in another crop like barley and then add another one like pulse to that, so you end up with sort of a 4 or 5 year rotation, all of a sudden the sowing times, the pre-em options, the crop topping options broaden immensely, so you can bring in a whole range of different chemical and cultural tools that'll help maintain a really low seed bank. And from a WeedSmart perspective, and I guess what FarmLink are aiming to achieve here is achieve a profitable crop but keep the seed bank low.